Welcome back to the Gilmore Ghost Town podcast.
Yeah.
You know, when you're walking through those deserted streets, you might be wondering what lies beneath your feet.
Literally, yeah.
Literally this time in episode 4, we're going on a deep dive into the geology of the Texas mining district.
Okay.
And the area around Gilmore.
All right.
And you might be surprised to learn just how much the rocks themselves shaped the history of this place.
It's true. The story of Gilmore is really etched in stone.
Wow.
To understand why miners flocked here, struck it rich, and eventually moved on,
Right.
we need to go way back in time, back to the very foundation of this landscape.
Okay, so set the scene for us.
Yeah.
What's the big picture, geologically speaking, when it comes to Gilmore, Idaho?
Well, Gilmore sits in a fascinating spot.
Okay.
Geologically speaking, it's right in the middle of two major geological forces,
Uh-huh.
the Cordilleran Fold and Thrust Belt and the Basin and Range Province.
Wow.
It's like they met at Gilmore for a showdown.
A geological showdown.
Yeah.
That sounds intense.
It is.
Okay, the Cordilleran Fold and Thrust Belt is all about mountains being pushed up and over each other, creating these dramatic peaks and valleys.
Okay.
The Basin and Range, on the other hand, is about the Earth's crust stretching and thinning, creating a pattern of valleys and ranges, almost like a series of waves.
So Gilmore is sitting on a landscape shaped by these two opposing forces.
Exactly.
No wonder it's so rugged and interesting.
Yeah.
But let's go even deeper. What kind of rocks are we actually dealing with in the Gilmore area?
Well, the dominant rocks in the Gilmore area
Okay.
are from a group called the Belt Supergroup.
Okay.
These rocks formed over 1 billion years ago in an ancient rift basin, a place where the Earth's crust was pulling apart.
Wow.
Imagine it like a giant crack in the Earth's surface slowly widening
Okay.
and sediments filling it in over millions of years.
Wow. Over 1 billion years ago. So these rocks were already ancient before the dinosaurs even existed.
Exactly.
But what's so special about these Belt Supergroup rocks, and how did they lead to all that mining activity in Gilmore? Well, the composition of these rocks is really key. They contain the ingredients, so to speak, for the types of mineral deposits that miners were after.
Wow.
Specifically, we find formations like the Apple Creek Formation, the Big Creek Formation, and the Swagger Formation, which is a particularly hard type of quartzite.
Wait, so different formations within this Belt Supergroup.
Yeah.
It's like a rock group with a bunch of hit singles.
Ah, that's a great way to put it.
I like that.
And each of these hit singles played a different role in the story of mining in Gilmore.
Okay.
For example, the Swagger Formation, that hard quartzite, was incredibly resistant to the mineral-rich fluids that flowed through the other formations.
So the Swagger Formation was like a wall blocking those fluids from going certain places.
Exactly. Imagine these hot, mineral-rich waters called hydrothermal fluids moving through cracks and weaknesses in the Earth's crust. They pick up metals like gold, silver, and lead along the way. But when they hit the Swagger Formation, they had to go around it, forcing them into other formations where they ultimately deposited those metals.
Okay, so the Swagger Formation, while not directly containing the ore, played a crucial role in concentrating the valuable minerals into other formations. That's a pretty neat geological twist.
It is, and it's a great example of how understanding the different rock formations and how they interact is key to understanding why certain areas like the Texas mining district became mining hotspots.
This is already more fascinating than I expected.
Good.
So we have these ancient Belt Supergroup rocks with their different formations, like the Swagger Formation acting as a sort of geological obstacle course for those mineral-rich waters. But the story doesn't end there.
Not at all.
Okay.
The Belt Supergroup is just the foundation. On top of those rocks, we find layers of younger rocks called Paleozoic rocks that add another chapter to the story.
Paleozoic rocks, it's bringing us a bit closer to the present day, right? The age of the dinosaurs.
We're talking about rocks that formed roughly between 540 and 250 million years ago.
Wow.
And here's where things get a little weird in east central Idaho.
Okay.
The layers of Paleozoic rocks are thinner than you'd find in other areas. It's like someone took a giant geological eraser and skimmed off the top.
Wait, seriously, where did those missing layers go?
Well, geologists believe there was a persistent uplift called the Lemhi Arch in this area during the Paleozoic era.
Okay.
It acted like a barrier limiting the amount of sediment that could be deposited.
Right.
So the Paleozoic rocks we do find here are thinner than expected.
The Lemhi Arch, yet another geological feature shaping the landscape.
Right.
So what kinds of Paleozoic rocks did form in the Gilmore area, and how did they impact the mining story?
We find carbonates like limestones and dolomites,
Okay.
which typically form in shallow seas and shales.
Okay.
Now, while these rocks weren't the primary source of ore in the Texas mining district,
Right.
they added another layer of complexity to the geology, influencing how those hydrothermal fluids moved and where those precious metals were ultimately deposited.
And it's like a geological layer cake?
Exactly.
With a belt supergroup as the base and these Paleozoic rocks on top?
Right.
And all those layers with their different characteristics played a role in shaping the mineral deposits that miners sought.
You got it. But even with all these rock formations in place, the geological story of Gilmore was far from over too. The rocks themselves have been through a lot more than just the slow deposition of sediments. They've been twisted, bent, and broken by forces deep within the earth.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued.
Good.
We've got these ancient rocks with their mineral-rich veins.
Right.
But they haven't just been sitting there peacefully for a billion years. What else happened to them?
That's where things get really interesting. We need to talk about some major geological events that shaped the rocks and ultimately the landscape of Gilmore events like the Sevier orogeny and the Basin and Range extension.
Ooh, the Sevier orogeny and the Basin and Range extension? Those sound like geological heavy hitters.
Right.
Can't wait to hear what they did to those rocks. But we'll just keep going with these geological heavy hitters.
Yeah.
So right before we got sidetracked, we were talking about how these ancient rocks in the Gilmore area have been through the ringer, geologically speaking. We left off with some pretty dramatic names, the Sevier orogeny and the Basin and Range extension. What exactly did those events do to the landscape?
Well, think of it like this. You have this layered cake of belt supergroup rocks and Paleozoic rocks all neatly stacked.
Right.
Then along comes the Sevier orogeny, a period of intense mountain building that started about 150 million years ago.
Okay.
It's like someone took that cake and squeezed it from the sides.
So all those rock layers got folded and bent under that incredible pressure.
Exactly. And not just bent. They were broken in places, creating faults, specifically thrust faults, where older rocks were pushed up and over younger rocks. The Sevier orogeny was a major force in creating the mountainous terrain we see around Gilmore today.
Wow. So those mountains we admire when we visit Gilmore are actually the result of this ancient geological squeezing.
Yeah.
It's amazing to think about the forces involved.
It really is. And then after the Sevier orogeny did its thing, things started to stretch out again. That's where the Basin and Range extension comes in.
So from squeezing to stretching, talk about a geological workout.
Right. Starting around 50 million years ago and continuing to this day, the Earth's crust in this region began to stretch and thin. It's like taking that squeezed cake and pulling it apart from the ends.
So instead of mountains being pushed up, we get valleys dropping down.
Exactly. And as the crust stretched and thinned, it broke into a series of blocks forming those characteristic valleys and ranges we see in the Basin and Range province. In fact, the Lemhi Range, which rises dramatically to the east of Gilmore, is a direct result of this extension.
Okay, so the Sevier orogeny squeezed, creating mountains and thrust faults, and then the Basin and Range extension stretched, creating valleys and those distinctive north-south trending ranges. It's like a geological dance with pushing and pulling over millions of years.
A very slow dance. And even today, that dance continues. The Basin and Range is still stretching, which means that the landscape is still changing, albeit very slowly.
That's mind-blowing. So all this squeezing, stretching, and faulting, how did it affect those mineral deposits we were talking about? Did it make things harder or easier for the miners?
Well, all this tectonic activity had a profound impact on those mineral deposits. The folding and faulting created pathways for those hydrothermal fluids to move through and also concentrated those minerals in certain areas.
So in a way, all that geological chaos actually helped create those rich ore deposits that made Gilmore a boomtown.
Exactly. It's a bit of a paradox, but without all that tectonic activity, the mineral wealth that drew people to Gilmore might not have been so easily accessible. Those miners owe a lot to the Sevier orogeny and the Basin and Range extension.
This is incredible. I'm starting to see how Gilmore's history is literally written in the rocks. But before we get too carried away with the big picture, let's zoom in on something specific. You mentioned the Lemhi Fault earlier. What's the story there, and how does it relate to Gilmore?
Yes. The Lemhi Fault, it runs right along the eastern edge of the Lemhi Range and is one of the most prominent features in the landscape. It's a normal fault, which means that one side of the fault is dropping down relative to the other.
So it's like a giant crack in the Earth's crust with one side slowly slipping downwards.
A very simplified way to put it, but yes, and this slipping isn't just some ancient event. The Lemhi Fault is still active, which means it's still moving.
Hold on, active, so it's still causing earthquakes today.
It is, and that's why it's so important to understand the geology of the area. When you're standing in Gilmore, you're not just standing on the remnants of a ghost town, you're standing on a landscape that is still being shaped by active tectonic forces.
Wow, so if I was standing in Gilmore during an earthquake, I'd literally be feeling the basin and range extension in action. That's pretty intense.
You got it. And those earthquakes, while potentially hazardous, also serve as a reminder that the geological story of Gilmore is still being written. Who knows what new chapters might be added in the future as those tectonic plates continue their slow dance.
This is mind-blowing. I've always been fascinated by ghost towns, but I never imagined they could teach me so much about geology. It's like a hidden dimension right beneath our feet.
It's a reminder that the past is always present, especially in a place like Gilmore. Every building, every street, every rock tells a story, and those stories are often intertwined with the forces that have shaped the Earth itself.
This has been an incredible journey through time, from ancient rift basins to mountain-building events to the ever-shifting Lemhi Fault. We uncovered a rich tapestry of geological history, and I feel like we're just getting started.
We are.
With the story, so I have a feeling there's more. Is there anything else we should know about the geology of the Texas mining district and how it impacted mining activities in Gilmore?
There is. We've talked about the big picture, but to really understand how geology and mining intersect in Gilmore, we need to zoom in on some specific examples. We need to look at how those different rock formations, the faults and the hydrothermal fluids all came together to create the conditions for mining success and sometimes mining failures.
Okay, now you've really piqued my curiosity. I'm ready for those specific examples, and I think our listeners are too. So let's dive right in.
Okay, so let's dive right in. Give us some more specifics.
Let's zoom in on the Texas mining district. Remember those hydrothermal fluids we talked about?
Yeah.
The superheated waters carrying dissolved metals.
Yeah, those metal delivery trucks flowing through cracks in the earth.
Well, in the Texas mining district, those fluids flowed through the belt supergroup rocks, encountering different formations along the way. Each formation had a unique impact on where and how those minerals were deposited.
So it's not just about the fluids themselves, but about the rocks they encounter along the way. It's like a geological obstacle course for those metal-carrying waters.
Exactly. And those obstacles played a big role in determining where miners found the richest ore deposits.
Okay, I'm all ears. Give us an example.
Let's talk about the Swagger Formation again, that tough, resistant quartzite.
Right.
Because it was so hard those hydrothermal fluids couldn't penetrate it as easily.
But they were forced to flow around it, concentrating into other formations like the Apple Creek and Big Creek formations.
So the Swagger Formation was like a natural dam, redirecting those mineral-rich fluids into more favorable spots for ore deposition.
Precisely, and that's exactly what happened in the Texas mining district. The Swagger Formation, while not containing much ore itself, played a crucial role in concentrating those minerals into other areas, creating the rich veins that miners sought.
That's fascinating. So if I was a prospector back in Gilmore's heyday, knowing about the Swagger Formation would have been key to finding the best spots to dig, right?
Absolutely. A savvy prospector would have looked for those areas where the Swagger Formation came into contact with other formations, like the Apple Creek. That's where the odds of finding a rich ore vein were highest.
This is making me want to grab a pickaxe and head out to Gilmore myself. But seriously, it's incredible how understanding the geology can unlock the secrets of the mining history.
And it goes beyond just finding the ore. The different rock formations also influence the types of mining techniques used. For example, the Swagger Formation, being so hard, required more blasting and heavy machinery to extract the ore.
So the geology dictated not only where to mine, but also how to mine. That's a pretty powerful connection.
It is, and it highlights why geology was so crucial to the success and sometimes the failure of mining operations in Gilmore.
Okay, so we've got these different rock formations, faults, and hydrothermal fluids, all playing a role in shaping the mineral deposits. But we also talked about earthquakes and active faulting. Did those play a role in mining as well?
Yes, the active geology of the area, particularly the Lemhi Fault, posed both challenges and opportunities for miners. On the one hand, earthquakes could cause cave-ins and make mining more dangerous.
So those miners weren't just dealing with the usual risks of mining, they were also working in a seismically active zone.
Right, but on the other hand, those same faults that caused earthquakes also created pathways for those mineral-rich fluids to flow through.
So it's a double-edged sword.
Mm-hmm.
Faults could make things dangerous, But they could also lead to the formation of rich ore veins.
Exactly. And that's the story of geology, isn't it? It's a constant interplay of forces creating both beauty and danger and shaping the landscape in unexpected ways.
Well, I think we've officially gone from ghost town enthusiast to geology geeks. This deep dive has given us a whole new appreciation for the forces that shaped Gilmore.
And it's a reminder that even in a ghost town, the story is never truly over. The rocks themselves hold a record of the past, and the ongoing tectonic activity hints at the possibility of new chapters yet to be written.
So as we wrap up this episode, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought next time you visit Gilmore. Take a moment to look around and imagine the forces that shaped those mountains, valleys, and the very ground beneath your feet. It's a story that goes back billions of years and continues to unfold today. Until next time, keep exploring.